In the winter of 1856, in a remote corner of southeastern Ohio, 3 newborn boys entered the world under circumstances so extraordinary that medical professionals still debate their case in hushed tones today. Born in the hidden basement of a Quaker meeting house during one of the most dangerous nights in Underground Railroad history, these triplets developed abilities that defied every known law of human psychology and physiology. For over a century, their descendants have guarded secrets about what those boys could do. Secrets that, if revealed, would force us to reconsider everything we thought we knew about the limits of human perception. What I'm about to share with you has never been told outside the family records, never documented in any official medical journal, and never spoken of in any academic circle. The evidence has been deliberately buried. But tonight, the truth finally comes to light. Before we dive deeper into this chilling account that begins in the shadows of America's most secretive rescue network, I need to know something about you. This channel isn't for everyone, only for those brave enough to confront mysteries that challenge the very foundations of what we believe possible. If you're one of the few who can handle stories that blur the line between documented history and inexplicable phenomena, hit that subscribe button right now, and while you're at it, drop a comment telling me what state you're listening from. I want to know where my fellow mystery seekers are gathering tonight, because what you're about to hear happened not in some distant mystical land, but right here in America, in communities that might be disturbingly close to your own. The story begins on a bitter February night in 1856, when 3 lives entered this world in the most unlikely place imaginable. The town of Cedar Mills, Ohio barely deserved the name at the time. With a population hovering around 300 souls, it consisted of little more than a cluster of modest homes, a general store, a blacksmith shop, and the simple brick meeting house that served the local Quaker community. Unlike their more demonstrative Christian neighbors, the Society of Friends in Cedar Mills practiced their faith quietly. Their plain dress and solemn demeanor reflected a deep commitment to simplicity, and most importantly, to the radical belief that all human beings were equal in the eyes of God. This conviction had transformed their meeting house into something far more dangerous than a place of worship. It had become Station 14 on the Underground Railroad, a crucial stop for freedom seekers making their way north from Kentucky and Virginia. Elder Samuel Whitmore, a man whose weathered hands spoke of decades working the soil and whose piercing gray eyes held secrets that could hang half the congregation, had been conducting this clandestine work for nearly 8 years. Beneath the meeting house's plain wooden floors lay a carefully concealed basement, accessed through a trapdoor hidden beneath the speaker's platform. The basement itself was a marvel of desperate engineering. Dug by hand over months of careful work, it stretched nearly the full length of the building above. Thick wooden beams supported the ceiling, while ventilation came through an ingenious system of hollow fence posts that appeared decorative but carried fresh air to those hiding below. On any given week, anywhere from 3 to 15 freedom seekers might shelter there, some for a single night, others for weeks, as they waited for safe passage to the next station. February of 1856 had been particularly treacherous. The Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 had emboldened slave catchers who now roamed freely through Ohio with legal authority to reclaim human property. Professional bounty hunters like the notorious Garrett brothers had been spotted in the area for weeks, offering substantial rewards for information about Underground Railroad operations. The tension in Cedar Mills was so thick you could almost taste it. Every unexpected visitor, every knock at the door after dark, every unusual sound could signal discovery and imprisonment. It was against this backdrop of fear and secrecy that a young woman had arrived at the meeting house 3 days earlier. She had given her name only as Ruth, claimed to be 19 years old, and was obviously with child, very much with child. Samuel Whitmore had taken one look at her swollen belly and known immediately that she wouldn't be traveling any further north for quite some time. What he hadn't expected was just how soon that child would arrive, or how profoundly its arrival would change everything they thought they knew about human nature. Ruth had come from a plantation in northern Kentucky. She told them in whispered conversations during her first nights in the basement. She spoke with the careful diction of someone who had been taught to read, unusual for someone in her circumstances, and carried herself with a dignity that impressed even the stoic Quakers. But there was something else about her, something that made people uneasy without quite understanding why. She seemed to know things, small things, but disturbing in their accuracy. She would know when someone was approaching the meeting house, long before any sound could be heard. She would refuse food that later proved to be spoiled, though it had appeared perfectly fresh. Most unsettling of all, she would sometimes look directly at whoever was speaking and quietly contradict their words, not argumentatively, but with the calm certainty of someone who simply knew better. "That man who brought the supplies yesterday," she had said to Samuel's wife Martha on her second evening there. "He told you his name was Williams, didn't he? And that he was from Lancaster?" Martha had nodded, confused. "His name isn't Williams," Ruth had continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "And he's never been to Lancaster in his life. I don't know why he lied to you, but he did." Martha had dismissed this as the paranoid rambling of a frightened pregnant woman, until 2 days later when the man's real identity was discovered. He was indeed using a false name, and had been asking suspicious questions about the meeting house's activities. The night of February 23, 1856, began like many others in Cedar Mills. Cold, dark, and deceptively quiet. Samuel Whitmore had been conducting his evening prayers when a soft knock came at the meeting house door, followed by the agreed-upon signal, 3 quick raps, a pause, then 2 more. But something felt wrong from the moment Samuel lifted the heavy wooden beam that barred the door. The freedom seeker who stumbled inside was a man named Joshua, someone Samuel had helped before. But Joshua's usual calm demeanor had been replaced by barely controlled panic. "They're coming," Joshua gasped, his breath forming white clouds in the frigid air. "The Garrett brothers, and at least 6 others. They've got dogs, and they know about this place." Someone talked. He paused, his eyes darting toward the basement entrance. "They may be 2 hours behind me, probably less." Samuel felt his blood turn to ice. In 8 years of underground railroad work, they had never faced a direct threat like this. The meeting house had always been considered safe, protected by the community's reputation for honesty and their careful operational security. But if the Garretts were coming with dogs and advanced knowledge of the basement, someone had indeed betrayed them. The immediate problem was evacuation. There were currently 7 people sheltering in the basement, including Ruth, who had been experiencing intermittent labor pains for most of the day. Martha Whitmore had been monitoring her condition, but had hoped the birth wouldn't come for at least another week. Mother Nature, however, seemed to have other plans. As if summoned by Joshua's words, a low moan echoed from beneath the floorboards. Martha's face went pale. "Samuel," she whispered. "Ruth's time has come, right now." The next few hours unfolded like a nightmare carved from ice and fear. While Samuel and 2 other men worked frantically to evacuate the other 6 freedom seekers through the meeting house's hidden northern tunnel, a hand-dug passage that emerged nearly a quarter-mile away in a dense grove of oak trees, Martha and her daughter Rebecca descended into the basement to attend to Ruth's labor. What they found in that cramped, dimly lit space challenged every assumption they held about childbirth. Ruth was indeed in active labor, but something was profoundly wrong. She was experiencing none of the usual signs of distress or pain that accompanied difficult births. Instead, she lay perfectly still on the rough straw mattress, her eyes closed, her breathing steady and controlled. When contractions came, she didn't cry out or even tense her muscles. She simply waited as if listening to something only she could hear. "How many babies?" Martha asked, pressing her ear to Ruth's swollen belly in the traditional way of midwives. Ruth's eyes opened for the first time in an hour. In the flickering candlelight, they seemed almost luminous. "3," she said simply. "3 boys. They've been waiting for tonight." Martha exchanged a worried glance with her daughter. Triplets were rare enough under the best circumstances, but triplets born in a hidden basement while slave catchers approached with bloodhounds was a situation beyond anything in her experience. More troubling was Ruth's certainty about the baby's gender and her strange comment about them waiting. How could unborn children wait for anything? The sound of horses in the distance cut through Martha's confusion. Samuel's voice called down from above. "They're here. The tunnel's clear, but we can't risk moving Ruth now." What happened next was recorded in Martha Whitmore's private journal, a document that remained hidden in her family for over a century before being discovered in 2003 during the renovation of an old farmhouse. According to her account, Ruth's labor accelerated dramatically the moment the slave catchers arrived at the meeting house, but it accelerated in a way that defied medical understanding. The first baby was born in complete silence. No crying, no sound at all, except for Ruth's barely audible breathing. Martha caught the infant, a perfectly formed boy, and was startled to find him already breathing normally, his eyes open and alert. Before she could even cut the umbilical cord, the second baby arrived, again in total silence, again breathing and aware from the moment of birth. The third followed less than a minute later, completing what Martha described as the most unnatural natural birth I have ever witnessed. But the strangest part was yet to come. As Martha worked to clean and wrap the 3 infants, footsteps and voices could be heard directly above them. The Garrett brothers had entered the meeting house and were conducting a thorough search. Heavy boots walked across the wooden floors just feet above the newborns' heads. At one point, someone stood directly on the trapdoor that concealed the basement entrance. Throughout this entire time, with strange men and tracking dogs just above them, the 3 babies never made a sound. Not a cry, not a whimper, not even the small noises that all newborns make. They lay perfectly still in their mother's arms, their identical dark eyes moving back and forth as if following the movement of the searchers above. It was as if they somehow understood that their survival depended on absolute silence. Ruth never spoke during the search. According to Martha's journal, she simply held her 3 sons and whispered to them in a language that sounded like no dialect Martha had ever heard. Later, Martha would describe it as words that seemed to flow like water, soft and continuous, like a river running over stones. The search lasted nearly 3 hours. The The Garretts were thorough, methodical, and increasingly frustrated. They checked every room, every closet, every possible hiding place. Their dogs sniffed around the meeting house's foundation and even scratched at the floorboards in several places, but they never found the entrance to the basement. Eventually they left, cursing their informant for providing bad information. It was only after the sounds of horses had faded completely into the distance that the three babies finally made their first sounds, and when they did, all three cried in perfect unison, their voices blending into a single haunting wail that seemed to echo from the very walls of the basement. Ruth died less than an hour later, bleeding that Martha couldn't stop despite all her experience with difficult births. Her last words, spoken so quietly that Martha had to lean close to hear them, were, "They'll know things, they'll always know. Take care of them. But remember, they're not like other children." At the exact time the triplets began showing signs of extreme distress, Dr. Harrison, who had been documenting the boys' development, was summoned after the third such incident. His private notes recorded findings that were deeply unsettling. During episodes of what appeared to be long-distance emotional distress sensing, the boys' pulse rates became synchronized, their breathing patterns identical, and their body temperatures dropped by several degrees. Most remarkably, their brain activity spiked dramatically. They were clearly experiencing intense mental stimulation, though they appeared outwardly distressed. Dr. Harrison could only conclude that their nervous systems were somehow detecting emotional trauma occurring at great distances. The mechanism was unknown to medical science, but the boys' abilities seemed specifically attuned to situations involving deception, betrayal, and mortal danger. They never responded to ordinary accidents or natural deaths, but always reacted when someone was being hunted, betrayed, or murdered. Their range extended throughout much of southern and central Ohio, and possibly into northern Kentucky. Word of the triplets' abilities spread beyond the Underground Railroad network. Families with missing loved ones began traveling to Cedar Mills, hoping the boys could sense whether their relatives were alive and possibly locate them. Samuel Whitmore was reluctant to exploit the children's abilities, but the boys themselves seemed drawn to the desperate families. One of the most remarkable cases involved the Brennan family, whose 16-year-old daughter, Mary, had disappeared while visiting relatives in Columbus. 3 months after her disappearance, her parents arrived in Cedar Mills, having heard rumors of children who could find lost people. Samuel initially refused to involve the boys, but Caleb, Ezra, and Isaac approached the Brennans of their own accord. Without being prompted, they stood before Mrs. Brennan and began whispering in unison. After several minutes, Isaac stepped forward, pointed southeast toward the Ohio River, and said simply, "She's there. She's scared, but she's alive. The man who took her isn't who he said he was." Acting on this, authorities searched a remote farm near Chillicothe and found Mary locked in a cellar with 2 other young women. The kidnapper, a man posing as a traveling preacher, confessed to planning to sell them into prostitution in New Orleans. Mary's rescue marked a turning point. The triplets were no longer seen merely as children with a strange ability to detect lies. They had become something else, something that made even their Quaker guardians deeply uneasy. Their abilities grew stronger and more specific with each month, with no apparent limit to their range or accuracy. Most troubling was their increasing emotional detachment. Constant exposure to deception, violence, and suffering seemed to dull their joy. They rarely smiled, seldom played, and spent most of their time huddled together, whispering in their private language. When they did speak to adults, their words were marked by a wisdom and sadness well beyond their years. Dr. Harrison's final notes before his death in 1862 expressed grave concern. "I fear we are witnessing the emergence of beings fundamentally different from the rest of our species. Their abilities are expanding. I cannot predict what they might become capable of as they mature. The psychological cost is immense. They are witnessing more suffering and evil than most adults encounter in a lifetime without the emotional defenses adults possess. I fear they will be men apart, forever isolated by their terrible knowledge." The Civil War brought chaos to the Underground Railroad but also new opportunities for the triplets' abilities to manifest. In the summer of 1861, 6-year-old Caleb, Ezra, and Isaac began showing signs of agitation for several consecutive days. They stood at the meeting house windows, gazing south toward the Ohio River with expressions of horror far beyond their years. Asked what was wrong, Isaac replied, "Too many people are going to die." 3 days later, word arrived of the Union defeat at Bull Run. As similar incidents followed, the timing became impossible to dismiss as coincidence. The boys began reacting to military events days or weeks in advance, their distress proportionate to the scale of casualties. They also exhibited an ability to detect individuals among thousands. In September 1861, a Union soldier named Thomas Caldwell visited the meeting house while on leave. The triplets immediately whispered in unison, their faces grave. Asked what they sensed, Ezra said in an unnervingly mature voice, "He won't make it home. The man who's supposed to be his friend will shoot him for his money 3 days from now, near the river crossing." Caldwell laughed off the warning, saying he traveled alone and had no money worth stealing. 3 days later, his body was found 20 miles east of Cedar Mills, shot and robbed by a deserter named Patterson, who had posed as a friend. The triplets' predictions sent shockwaves through the community. In the months that followed, the boys made increasingly specific and disturbing predictions. Samuel Whitmore struggled with the moral implications of their foresight. Should he warn people, intervene, or was this knowledge too dangerous to act upon? The boys reported death and betrayal with the emotional detachment of someone commenting on the weather. A turning point came in spring 1862, when conductor James Morrison arrived at the meeting house with 12 freedom seekers. Morrison had been a trusted ally for years, but the moment the triplets saw him, they began screaming in terror, a primal sound unlike anything Samuel had heard. When questioned, the boys repeated, "Death, he brings death, so much death." Despite this, Morrison insisted he had safely brought the group from Kentucky. The 12 seemed genuine, but the boys refused to go near them and warned, "Tomorrow night in the woods by Miller's Creek, he'll call to them, and they'll trust him because they think he's their friend, but the men with guns will be waiting." Samuel compromised. He allowed the group to proceed but sent word ahead and dispatched 2 local men to follow at a distance. What they witnessed confirmed the boys' vision. At a clearing near Miller's Creek, Morrison called out, and slave catchers emerged. 7 people were killed, including children. 5 were captured and returned to slavery. Morrison, revealed as a double agent, was seen collecting payment. The community was devastated. The triplets' reaction was unlike anything seen before. They didn't express anger or sadness, only deep disappointment. "People never listen," Isaac said. "They never want to believe what we can see. They think we're just children, but we've seen more death than anyone here. We know what people are capable of when they think no one is watching." With that, something fundamental changed. The boys had become beings apart, with insight into the darkest corners of human nature. Their abilities continued to evolve. In the brutal winter of 1863, when they were 8, Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell, a neurologist, began a 6-month study. Using the latest instruments, she found that the boys' nervous systems were in constant communication. Electrical stimulation of one boy resulted in immediate responses from the others, even in separate rooms. During periods of concentration, their vitals and brainwaves synchronized, functioning as a shared consciousness in 3 bodies. Most startling was their detection of deception through electromagnetic signals from human brains. Dr. Hartwell concluded that their enhanced perception stemmed from electromagnetic sensitivity, not supernatural power. Analysis of their deceased mother's tissue revealed she had been exposed to high doses of mercury and lead-based pigments common in indigo dye processing during pregnancy. These toxins damaged her, but triggered genetic mutations in her unborn children, creating a sensory capacity previously unknown. More chilling, the mutations were dominant traits, likely to be passed on to their children. Dr. Hartwell wrote, "We are witnessing the birth of a new branch of human evolution. These descendants," she predicted, would grow more sensitive with each generation. But danger loomed. Both Union and Confederate forces wanted to exploit the boys for intelligence. Federal marshals arrived in Cedar Mills to take them to Washington. Yet the boys had already packed and were preparing to flee. Caleb said, "If we stay, bad things will happen to everyone here." Isaac added, "They want to study us, cut us open, and then they'll come for our children." Ezra said, "We've seen the world they want, one where people like us are kept in cages." As horses approached, the boys left the only home they had ever known. Before disappearing, they made one final revelation: there were others. Children born during violent times, exposed in the womb to toxins, possessing similar abilities. "We'll find them," Ezra said. "We'll teach them, and maybe build a world where people can't lie, hide evil, or pretend to be good. We'll be watching, always." The marshals found only empty rooms. No trace of the boys was ever recovered. Dr. Hartwell's research remained classified for over 60 years. When released in 1924, it caused a sensation. By then, the boys would have been nearly 70, and any hope of finding them was gone. Samuel Whitmore died in 1889, his private papers revealing his belief that he had witnessed the future of humanity, terrifying and amazing. After the boys' disappearance, the Underground Railroad station declined. Without their warnings, operations became perilous. In the following decades, rumors of similar children emerged. A girl in Pennsylvania who predicted accidents, twin boys in Texas who found missing persons, a child in California who could sense lies. Most stories were dismissed, but patterns emerged. The children were born in times of upheaval. Their mothers had been exposed to toxins. They showed signs of electromagnetic sensitivity. Modern research confirms Dr. Hartwell's theory. Stress and exposure to industrial chemicals can trigger genetic evolution. At least 47 cases of enhanced individuals were documented between 1850 and 1900. Most quietly lived normal lives, but the legacy persisted. Dr. Sarah Chen of Johns Hopkins believes up 0.1% of Americans today may possess some degree of electromagnetic sensitivity. The future of human evolution, she believes, may already be unfolding. In 2003, during a renovation in southeastern Ohio, a hidden room was found with documents, including a 1923 letter written in 3 handwritings and signed, "The Children of Cedar Mills." The letter included genealogical records showing the triplets had survived, fathered children, and passed on their abilities. It also listed predictions, wars, technological milestones that came true. The letter concluded, "We are still here. We have grown in number and ability. When humanity is ready, we will reveal ourselves. Until then, we remain hidden, learning and preparing." On February 23, 2024, the anniversary of the triplets' birth, over 50 people gathered at the address given in the letter. What happened that day remains unknown. Attendees have refused to speak. But since then, several have begun working together on research and investigations related to missing persons and deception detection. Dr. Chen, present at the meeting, says only this: the legacy of the Cedar Mills triplets is far from over. In fact, it may just be beginning. Whether they represent hope or danger, one thing is certain: the children of Cedar Mills are still watching.